Sometimes I start a build just because I want to use a certain color scheme, and today that color was purple. This is Clamp, a new mech suit I built, as well as its pilot, Scamp. If you like this build and want to make it yourself, the instructions are available on both Payhip and Rebrickable. The links will be in the description as well as in my pinned comment down below. Lots of work and many revisions went into Clamp and Scamp, but the result was this bulky and heavily armed troll of a mech that I'm very proud of and very excited to be sharing with all of you. The build actually started out as this small chunk of parts that helped me decide which colors I wanted to use and how much of each I wanted to include. I knew I wanted this build to have a pretty garish color scheme, but the main goal was to use mostly purple. I settled on orange as a secondary color, along with some white and just a tiny bit of dark azure, while also keeping in mind that I might want to use a trans bright green windshield down the line if I thought it fit in well enough. And lucky enough, it somehow did. Once the colors were decided on and the build was underway, I began planning what kind of weapons I wanted Clamp to have. The first thing I settled on was that there was going to be a massive gun protruding from the chest, almost like Clamp was a machine gun nest on legs. I ended up with more of an anti-material rifle rather than the machine gun I originally planned, but the look was absolutely accomplished. Opening the cockpit gives a better look at the pilot, Scamp, manning the rifle, and he even has a small targeting display on the back of the weapon for lining up his shots. The input for this display comes from this small camera mounted underneath the barrel of the gun. Next, I knew I wanted some kind of ordnance launcher mounted on the shoulder in order to have at least one more weapon on Clamp's torso. Basically, I wanted to give the idea that this mech could lose both of its arms and still be a pretty formidable opponent. It was fun to come up with a slightly more unique design for this launcher, and I like to think it fires out tiny, guided fire-and-forget missiles in small bursts. For the arms, I decided to go with weapons that were more melee-oriented. I believe I was feeling a bit of inspiration from a dreadnought from Warhammer 40k. The left hand is pretty straightforward with a chainsaw mounted under the arm, which is still a design that I'm happy with, but the right hand gets to be a little bit more interesting. Instead of using another standard-sized clip for the hand, as I normally do, I decided to go for a large bladed claw that I imagine would be used in tandem with the chainsaw for clearing debris such as wire or foliage from the mech's path. And also for the obvious stuff you're imagining. However, the story of the claw doesn't end there. Just for good measure, I decided to also include this small candle flame piece as sort of a visual cue that this claw also has a flamethrower embedded inside of it. On the inside of the arm, you'll find the flamethrower's fuel tank. This is a little bit of detail that makes me much happier than it should. Given Clamp's rather heavy-set design, I also felt it was important to include a pair of small thrusters on his back. Not anywhere near strong enough to take flight, obviously, but enough to give the mech a boost when it needs to move quicker than something of this size would normally be able to. With such a bulky design, articulation became a little bit of a challenge. I didn't need Clamp to do any cartwheels, but I did need to be convinced that if it was real, it would be able to move relatively efficiently. The most limited points are in the shoulders, where these large chunks of armor can easily bump and scrape along the body. In order to remedy this, there is a second joint just below the shoulder that allows the rest of the arm to swing outward, independent and also having a bit of a bicep swivel. The elbows are just elbows, not super flexible, but good enough for this design, I think. The legs were also a bit tricky, but for a slightly different reason. I knew I wanted Clamp to have rather short and stumpy legs, but I also didn't want him to be so comically short that you'd begin to imagine that he waddles. After several different revisions, I settled on a design that struck the balance I was looking for, looking strong and powerful, but still on the short side. The large ball joints in the hips provide the majority of the articulation, while the knee bend is accomplished with a simple bar and clip connection that has been tripled up for maximum strength. The end result was surprising to me. Mostly I was surprised that I had this many parts in purple, but I was also surprised by how much I like this final design. It feels rough and rugged, but its colors are loud and flashy, and the fact that they somehow work so well together was probably the biggest surprise of all. With its wide array of weaponry, I like to imagine that Scamp was originally designed to be some kind of mass-produced fire support mech. I can just imagine multiple of these bots stomping through some alien jungle or holding the line in a narrow choke point, although I'm sure this paint job would be considered against regulation. In my LEGO world, Clamp and Scamp frequently work alongside another pilot, Tag, and his mech, Zeke the Critter, both of whom I've shown in a previous video. I like to imagine the two pilots previously served together as grunts for the Future Mechanics Corporation, but have decided to go into the freelance security business now that their enlistment has come to an end. These days they make their living guarding a Future Mechanics data warehouse and have maintained a decent working relationship despite their slight differences. So if you like big chunky lads that can cut through a van like butter and then roast everything inside it, or you just like the color purple, please consider checking out Clamp and Scamp's instructions over on PayHip or Rebrickable. Again, both links will be available in the video description as well as my pinned comment. Thank you all for watching, and I'll talk to you again real soon.